When the man you've loved for 10 years tries to strangle you while screaming about how you ruined his chance at true love, death feels like freedom. But when you wake up 17 again with the knowledge of what that love will cost you, you realize the greatest revenge isn't violence. It's refusing to play the game at all. My name is Sofia Martinez, and I died at 28 when my boyfriend of 10 years, Alex Chin, drove our car off a bridge in a murder-suicide because he blamed me for stealing the life he was supposed to have with his deceased first love, Jordan Kim. The last thing I heard before we hit the water was Alex screaming that I had destroyed his chance at happiness, that I was a manipulative witch who had trapped him for a decade, that Jordan's death was somehow my fault because I existed in the space that should have been theirs. What made it even more horrifying was that I was 2 months pregnant with our child. A child Alex never knew existed because I'd been planning to surprise him on our 10-year anniversary. But when I opened my eyes again, I wasn't in a morgue or heaven, or wherever people go when they die. I was 17 years old, sitting in my high school chemistry class, watching Alex Chin walk through the door for the first time. And this time, I knew exactly what would happen if I let myself fall for his wounded boy act again. Alex was beautiful in that tragic, artistic way that made teenage girls want to save him. Tall and lean with dark hair that fell perfectly across his forehead, expressive brown eyes that seemed to hold infinite sadness, and the kind of brooding intensity that made him seem deep and mysterious. He was the new transfer student, having moved from California after his best friend, Jordan, had died in a car accident. In my previous life, I had been completely enchanted by his pain. When he'd sat alone at lunch, staring out the window with that haunted expression, I'd approached him with a kind smile and a homemade sandwich. When he'd broken down crying while telling me about Jordan, I'd held him and promised that I'd help him heal. I had thought I was witnessing beautiful, profound grief. I had thought I was the girl who could love him back to life. What I hadn't understood was that Alex wasn't grieving a best friend. He was grieving his first love, his soulmate, the person he believed he was destined to spend his life with. And in his mind, every day he spent with me was a betrayal of that cosmic connection. For 10 years, I had unknowingly been living as a placeholder, a consolation prize, a warm body to keep Alex company while he counted down the days until he could reunite with Jordan in death. This time, when Alex walked into chemistry class and the teacher asked me to show him around since we had the same schedule, I looked him straight in the eye and said, "I'm busy. Ask someone else." Mr. Peterson looked surprised. "Sophia, that's not very welcoming." "I have a lab report due next period," I said firmly. "I'm sure Jessica would be happy to help." Jessica, who had been making moon eyes at Alex since he walked in, practically launched herself out of her seat. "I'd love to show you around." I watched Alex's face register confusion and what looked like genuine hurt. In our original timeline, my kindness had been the hook that drew him in. He told me later that my willingness to care for a broken stranger had made him believe in goodness again. Now faced with casual rejection, he looked genuinely lost. Good. Let him figure out his own life this time. Over the next few days, I watched Alex struggle with social connections in a way he never had in our previous timeline. Without me as his automatic emotional support system, he had to actually put effort into making friends. Jessica was interested, but she wasn't the nurturing type. She wanted a boyfriend who would take her to parties and make her look good, not a therapy project. Several other girls showed interest, drawn by his mysterious new guy appeal, but Alex seemed to be looking specifically for someone who would take care of him emotionally. He needed a caregiver, not a girlfriend. Meanwhile, I was experiencing high school completely differently than I had the first time around. Without Alex's emotional needs consuming all my energy, I was free to focus on my own interests and friendships. I joined the debate team, started writing for the school newspaper, and actually paid attention in my classes instead of spending every moment worrying about Alex's mental state. It was liberating in a way I'd never imagined possible. "You seem different this year," my friend Emma commented as we walked to lunch together. "More confident or something." "I'm just focusing on myself instead of trying to fix other people," I replied. "Smart," Emma said. "Speaking of which, have you noticed that new guy Alex keeps staring at you? Like, intensely staring. It's kind of creepy." I glanced across the cafeteria and sure enough, Alex was watching me with an expression I recognized from our previous life. The look he got when he was trying to figure out how to get what he wanted. He probably wants help with homework, I said dismissively. But Alex's interest was more persistent than that. Over the next week, he made several attempts to engage me in conversation. He'd appear at my locker between classes, sit near me in the classes we shared, and even followed me to the library during study hall. "Sophia," he said one afternoon, cornering me by the reference section. "Can we talk?" "About what?" I asked, not looking up from my research. "I feel like I've done something to offend you," he said, employing the same vulnerable tone that had worked so well on me in our previous life. "And I can't figure out what it was. I'd really like to make it right." I looked at him directly, seeing him clearly for the first time in either lifetime. "Alex, you haven't done anything to offend me. I just don't feel like being your friend." "That's allowed." His face went through several expressions: surprise, hurt, and then something darker. "Why not?" "Because I'm not interested in being anyone's emotional support system," I said bluntly. "I've got my own life to live." "I never asked you to be my emotional support system," Alex protested. "Not in so many words," I agreed. "But you're looking for someone to help you process your grief over Jordan, and I'm not volunteering for that job." Alex went completely still. "How do you know about Jordan?" "You're not exactly subtle about being haunted by your dead best friend," I said. "And before you try to correct me, I know Jordan wasn't your best friend. Jordan was the love of your life, and you're looking for someone to help you cope with that loss. Find someone else." The blood drained from Alex's face. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I interrupted. "You're in love with a dead person, and you want a living person to help you feel less guilty about that. It's not my problem." I walked away, leaving Alex standing in the library looking like I'd slapped him. But I wasn't done. I'd spent 10 years of my previous life trying to help Alex heal from trauma he'd never fully explained to me. This time, I was going to make sure he got the help he actually needed instead of using me as a band-aid. That afternoon, I went to see Mrs. Rodriguez, the school counselor. "I'm concerned about a student," I told her. "Alex Chun, the new transfer student. I think he might be struggling with some serious grief issues." Mrs. Rodriguez nodded thoughtfully. "What makes you think that?" "He's mentioned losing someone named Jordan back in California," I said carefully. "He seems pretty broken up about it, and I think he might benefit from talking to someone professionally rather than just trying to cope on his own." "That's very observant of you, Sophia," Mrs. Rodriguez said. "And very kind. I'll make sure to check in with Alex." "Thank you," I said. "I just think he needs more help than his friends can provide." 2 days later, Alex found me again, this time with a very different energy. "What did you tell Mrs. Rodriguez?" he demanded, his voice tight with anger. "That you seem to be struggling with grief and might benefit from counseling," I replied calmly. "You had no right." "Actually, I had every right," I interrupted. "When someone is clearly in emotional distress, reporting it to a counselor is the responsible thing to do." Alex's hands were clenched into fists. "You don't know anything about me or what I'm going through. I know you're in love with a dead person and you're looking for a living person to help you process that," I said matter-of-factly. "I know you're angry that Jordan died before you could tell them how you felt. I know you blame yourself for not being honest about your feelings when you had the chance. And I know you're looking for someone to either help you carry that guilt or punish you for it." Alex's face had gone white. "How could you possibly?" "Because it's written all over your face every time someone mentions Jordan's name," I said. "You're not grieving a friend, Alex. You're grieving your first love. And that's fine, but it's not my job to help you with it." "I never asked for your help," Alex said through gritted teeth. "Not directly," I agreed. "But you've been trying to get my attention for weeks, and not because you want to be my friend. You want someone to take care of you emotionally. Someone to make you feel less alone. Someone to distract you from your pain. I'm not interested in that job." Alex stared at me for a long moment. "You really think you have me all figured out, don't you? I think you're a 17-year-old boy who's dealing with complicated grief and trauma, and you need professional help, not a girlfriend," I said. "There's nothing shameful about that. But there's also nothing I can do about it. And what if I told you that you're wrong? Alex asked. What if I said I was interested in you for reasons that have nothing to do with Jordan? I looked at him steadily. Then I'd say you were lying to yourself as much as you're lying to me. Alex's jaw tightened. You're really determined to think the worst of me, aren't you? I'm determined to protect myself from becoming someone's emotional crutch, I replied. Find someone else to help you carry your grief, Alex. I'm not available. I walked away again, but this time I could feel Alex's anger following me like a physical force. Over the next few weeks, I watched Alex's behavior deteriorate in ways that were both familiar and different from our original timeline. Without me as his emotional anchor, he was struggling to maintain the facade of being a normal teenager. His grades started slipping, he got into arguments with teachers, and he developed a reputation for being moody and unpredictable. Several girls had tried to get close to him, drawn by his tortured artist appeal, but Alex had rejected all of them with increasing hostility. It was becoming clear that I had been right about what he was looking for. He didn't want a girlfriend, he wanted a therapist who would work for free and never challenge him. Alex Chun is such a weirdo, I heard Jessica telling her friends. I tried to be nice to him, but he's just so negative about everything. It's like he wants to be miserable. I heard he got into a screaming match with Mr. Peterson about some chemistry assignment, another girl added. Like, completely lost it over nothing. I felt a twinge of something, not quite sympathy but recognition. In our previous life, Alex's emotional volatility had been one of the things that had convinced me he needed my help. I'd seen his anger and pain and assumed that love could heal it. Now I understood that Alex's problems were much deeper than simple grief, and much more complex than anything I could have fixed with kindness and patience. The breaking point came 2 months into the school year, during a particularly tense chemistry class. Mr. Peterson was explaining a complex molecular structure when Alex suddenly slammed his textbook shut and stood up. This is pointless, he announced to the room. None of this matters. We're all just going through the motions, pretending like any of this will make a difference when we're all going to die anyway. The class fell silent. Mr. Peterson looked genuinely concerned. Alex, why don't you step outside and get some air? Mr. Peterson suggested gently. Why don't you admit that this whole system is a joke? Alex shot back. We sit here memorizing formulas and pretending we're learning something meaningful, but it's all just busy work to distract us from the fact that life is random and cruel, and nothing we do actually matters. I recognized the spiral. In our previous life, Alex had gone through similar existential crises, usually triggered by something that reminded him of Jordan. I'd always been there to talk him through it, to remind him that life had meaning, to give him reasons to keep going. This time, I sat quietly and let him continue digging his own hole. Everything is temporary, Alex continued, his voice getting louder and more agitated. Everyone you love dies eventually. Everyone you care about leaves. So why pretend like any of this means anything? Alex, Mr. Peterson said firmly, you need to go to the counselor's office. Now. Fine, Alex said. At least she's honest about the fact that everyone needs therapy to cope with this meaningless existence. He stormed out, leaving the class in stunned silence. After class, Emma caught up with me in the hallway. That was intense, she said. Alex really seems like he's struggling with something. Yeah, I agreed. But it's not my problem to solve. Weren't you two friends at the beginning of the year? Emma asked. I thought I saw him trying to talk to you a lot. He wanted to be friends, I corrected. I wasn't interested. Maybe if someone had been willing to help him. Emma, I interrupted. Alex's problems are way bigger than anything a friend could fix. He needs professional help, not a teenage girl trying to save him with friendship. Emma looked like she wanted to argue, but something in my expression must have stopped her. That afternoon, I got called to Mrs. Rodriguez's office. Sophia, she said as I sat down across from her desk. I wanted to thank you for bringing Alex to my attention earlier this year. Has it helped? I asked. We're working on it, Mrs. Rodriguez said diplomatically. He's been resistant to counseling, but after today's incident, his parents and I are discussing some additional options. Like what? Possibly a grief counseling group, Maybe some individual therapy outside of school, she said. Alex is dealing with some very complex emotions around his friend's death, and it's affecting his ability to function normally. That makes sense, I said. Mrs. Rodriguez studied my face. Alex mentioned that you seem to understand his situation better than most people. He said you knew about Jordan without him having to explain. It wasn't hard to figure out, I said. He's not subtle about being haunted by someone. He also mentioned that you seem to know more than you should about his relationship with Jordan, Mrs. Rodriguez continued carefully. He said you understood things about his feelings that he'd never told anyone. I felt a chill run down my spine. Had Alex somehow figured out that I had knowledge from our previous timeline? I'm good at reading people, I said. And Alex isn't as mysterious as he thinks he is. Mrs. Rodriguez nodded slowly. Well, regardless of how you knew, your instinct to get him professional help was correct. Alex needs more support than his peers can provide. After I left the counselor's office, I found Alex waiting for me by my locker. His eyes were red-rimmed and intense in a way that made me genuinely nervous. We need to talk, he said. No, we don't, I replied, opening my locker and gathering my books. Yes, we do, Alex insisted, moving closer. Because you know things about me that you shouldn't know. And I want to know how. I met his gaze directly. I don't know what you're talking about. You knew about Jordan before I told anyone, Alex said. You knew about my feelings for Jordan before I'd even admitted them to myself. You knew things about my guilt and my grief that I've never said out loud. Like I told Mrs. Rodriguez, I'm good at reading people, I said firmly. No one is that good, Alex said. So either you're psychic, or you know more about my life than you're letting on. I slammed my locker shut and turned to face him fully. Alex, what exactly are you accusing me of? I'm not accusing you of anything, he said. I'm asking you how you know so much about me. And I'm telling you that you're not as complicated as you think you are, I replied. Your behavior patterns are pretty obvious once you know what to look for. Alex's jaw tightened. What behavior patterns? You're looking for someone to save you, I said bluntly. Someone to take care of your emotional needs. Someone to make you feel less guilty about being alive when Jordan isn't. Someone to punish you for your perceived failures. It's a classic trauma response. That's not. It is, I interrupted. And the reason I knew about your feelings for Jordan is because you were obviously in love with them. The way you talk about Jordan, the way your face changes when someone mentions their name, the way you've been unable to form any meaningful connections since their death. It's textbook complicated grief over lost love. Alex stared at me for a long moment. Who are you? I'm someone who's not interested in being your emotional support system, I said. Find someone else, Alex. I'm not available. I walked away, but I could feel Alex's eyes burning into my back. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that Alex was starting to piece together something I couldn't let him figure out. If he somehow realized that I had knowledge from a previous timeline, it would complicate everything. I needed to make sure Alex stayed focused on his own recovery instead of obsessing over me. The next morning, I arrived at school early and went straight to Mrs. Rodriguez's office. I'm worried about Alex, I told her. Yesterday he seemed to be fixated on me in a way that felt intense. He was asking me how I knew things about his situation, like he thought I had some special insight into his life. Mrs. Rodriguez frowned. What kind of things was he asking about? He seemed to think I knew more about his relationship with Jordan than I should, I said. And he was pressing me for explanations about how I could tell he was struggling with grief. That is concerning, Mrs. Rodriguez agreed. Trauma can sometimes make people paranoid or cause them to read significance into coincidences. I just don't want him to develop an unhealthy fixation on me, I said. He's already been trying to get my attention for months. And now he seems to think I have some special connection to his situation. I'll talk to him, Mrs. Rodriguez promised. And Sophia? If Alex continues to make you uncomfortable, please let me know immediately. Thank you, I said. 2 hours later, Alex was called out of our shared English class and didn't return. Word spread quickly that he'd been suspended pending a psychological evaluation. I heard he threatened another student, Jessica whispered to her friends. I heard he had a complete breakdown in the counselor's office, someone else added. I felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief that Alex would be getting more intensive help, concern about his mental state, and satisfaction that my plan to keep him away from me was working. But I also felt something else, guilt. In our previous life, I had been Alex's lifeline during his darkest moments. Without me, would he be able to survive what was coming? Then I remembered the feeling of water filling my lungs as Alex screamed about how I'd ruined his life, and the guilt evaporated. Alex didn't return to school for 2 weeks. When he finally came back, he was different, calmer, but also more distant. He was taking medication for depression and anxiety, and he was seeing a therapist twice a week. He also completely ignored me. For the first time since I'd been reborn, I felt like I could breathe freely. Without Alex's constant presence and emotional demands, I was able to focus on my own growth and development. I threw myself into my studies and extracurricular activities. I wrote articles for the school newspaper about mental health resources for teenagers. I organized a fundraiser for a local grief counseling center. I started tutoring younger students who were struggling academically. For the first time in either of my lives, I was building an identity that had nothing to do with being someone's savior. By spring, I had been accepted to several excellent colleges, including my dream school's journalism program. My grades were the best they'd ever been, and I had developed genuine friendships with people who appreciated me for who I was rather than what I could do for them. Meanwhile, Alex seemed to be doing better too, though I only observed him from a distance. He'd made a few friends in the drama club, and he seemed to have found a healthy outlet for his emotions through acting. I heard he was seeing someone, a boy named Marcus from the next town over who he'd met in group therapy. Good for him. I genuinely hoped he was finding his way to happiness. The final test came during our graduation ceremony. As we lined up in our caps and gowns, Alex appeared beside me for the first time in months. Sophia, he said quietly. Alex, I acknowledged. I wanted to thank you, he said. For what? For not enabling me, he said simply. For not letting me use you as a crutch. For forcing me to get real help instead of just finding someone to carry my pain for me. I looked at him, surprised by his maturity. How do you know that's what I was doing? Therapy, Alex said with a small smile. Lots and lots of therapy. My therapist helped me understand that I was looking for someone to be my emotional support person instead of learning to cope with my feelings in healthy ways. And now I'm learning to manage my grief and guilt without depending on someone else to make me feel better, Alex said. It's harder, but it's healthier. I'm glad, I said and meant it. I'm sorry, Alex continued, for trying to make you responsible for my emotional well-being. For getting angry when you wouldn't play that role. For whatever I might have done to make you uncomfortable. Apology accepted, I said. Alex hesitated. Can I ask you something? Sure. How did you know? He asked. How did you see through me so clearly when I couldn't even see myself clearly? I thought about how to answer that question truthfully without revealing the impossible truth. I recognized the pattern, I said finally. I could see that you were looking for someone to save you instead of learning to save yourself. And I knew that if I let you use me that way, it wouldn't help either of us. Alex nodded slowly. You were right. About all of it. I'm glad you got the help you needed, I said. Me too, Alex said. And Sophia? I hope you find someone who appreciates how strong and smart you are. You deserve better than someone who needs fixing. As we walked across the stage to receive our diplomas, I thought about the different paths our lives had taken this time around. In our previous timeline, Alex and I had been inseparable, bound together by his need and my willingness to meet it. We'd gone to the same college, moved in together, gotten engaged, and spent 10 years in a relationship where I gave everything and he gave nothing back. This time, we were both free to become who we were meant to be instead of who we thought we needed to be for each other. Alex went to a small liberal arts college known for its drama program. I went to Northwestern to study journalism. We lost touch completely, which was exactly how it should be. College was a revelation. Without the emotional burden of managing someone else's mental health, I excelled academically and socially. I wrote for the campus newspaper, volunteered with crisis counseling services, and eventually became editor of the school's literary magazine. I dated a few people, but casually and without the desperate need to be needed that had characterized my relationship with Alex. I was learning what it felt like to be valued for my intelligence, my humor, my ambition, not just my willingness to sacrifice myself for someone else's comfort. In my junior year, I met Daniel, a psychology major who was as emotionally healthy as he was kind. He was the kind of person who dealt with his own problems instead of expecting others to solve them for him, who supported my goals instead of seeing them as competition for my attention, who loved me for who I was instead of who he needed me to be. "You're different from other girls I've dated," Daniel told me one evening as we walked across campus after a movie. "How so?" I asked. "You're not trying to fix me," he said with a smile. "You're not looking for a project or a charity case. You actually seem to like me as I am." "Should I not?" I asked teasingly. "No, it's perfect," Daniel said. "It's just refreshing. I've dated girls who seemed more interested in my potential than in my reality." "You're interested in my reality." "Your reality is pretty great," I said honestly. "So is yours," Daniel replied, stopping to kiss me under a streetlight. As I stood there kissing this wonderful, emotionally available man who had never once asked me to carry his emotional baggage, I thought about Alex and wondered how his life was turning out. I got my answer 2 years later, when I saw a small article in an alumni magazine about theater students who had gone on to successful careers. Alex Chen had become a respected actor and playwright, specializing in works that dealt with LGBTQ+ themes and mental health issues. He was married to Marcus, the boy he'd met in therapy during high school, and they were expecting their first child through surrogacy. The article included a quote from Alex about his work. "I write about the journey from surviving to thriving, about learning to love yourself enough to get the help you need instead of expecting others to heal you. My husband likes to say that the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to enable their self-destruction." I smiled as I read that quote, recognizing the wisdom Alex had gained through proper therapy and healthy relationships. A few weeks later, I received an unexpected message through social media. It was from Alex. "Hi Sophia," the message read. "I hope this isn't weird, but I wanted to reach out because I've been thinking about you lately. I'm getting married next month, and as I've been preparing my vows, I keep coming back to something you taught me in high school. That real love means wanting the best for someone, even when that means saying no to them. You were the first person to love me enough to refuse to enable my self-destruction, and I wanted you to know that I credit that moment with changing the trajectory of my entire life. Thank you for being brave enough to force me to get real help instead of just letting me use you as a crutch. I hope you're as happy as you deserve to be." I stared at the message for a long time, feeling a complex mix of emotions. In our previous timeline, Alex had blamed me for ruining his life. In this timeline, he was crediting me with saving it. The difference was that this time, I had refused to participate in his self-destruction. I wrote back, "Congratulations on your wedding. I'm so glad you found your way to happiness and health. Wishing you and Marcus all the best in your new life together." I didn't mention that I was also getting married soon, to Daniel, who had proposed with a ring he'd saved for months to buy, and a speech about how he wanted to spend his life supporting my dreams instead of asking me to sacrifice them for his. But as I closed my laptop and went to meet Daniel for dinner, I thought about the strange mathematics of second chances. In my first life, Alex and I had both been miserable, him because he was living a lie, me because I was enabling that lie at the cost of my own identity and ultimately my life. This time, we were both happy, but separately, in the ways we were meant to be. Alex had learned to deal with his trauma through therapy and medication, and genuine love with someone who understood him. I had learned to value myself enough to refuse to be anyone's emotional crutch. Most importantly, I had learned that the most loving thing you can do for someone who is drowning is throw them a life preserver, not jump in the water with them. That night, as I lay in bed next to Daniel, who was reading a psychology journal and occasionally sharing interesting insights about his research, I thought about the child I had lost in my previous life. The child Alex and I never had because he killed us both before I could tell him I was pregnant. In this timeline, that child would never exist. But other children would exist. Children born to parents who had learned to love themselves and each other in healthy ways. Alex and Marcus's child, who would grow up with parents who had done the work to heal their trauma before becoming parents. The children Daniel and I might have someday, who would be born into a relationship based on mutual respect rather than codependency. The math worked out better this way, even though it meant letting go of the fantasy that love could heal everything. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to love someone the wrong way. Sometimes the only way to save someone is to refuse to save them. And sometimes the person you end up saving is yourself. 5 years later, I was working as an investigative journalist for a major newspaper, specializing in stories about mental health and domestic violence. Daniel and I had married and bought a small house where we hosted monthly dinners for our friends and foster dogs we were temporarily caring for. I was covering a story about new legislation for mental health resources in schools when I came across a quote from Dr. Alex Chun, who had become a prominent advocate for LGBTQ+ youth mental health services while continuing his work as a playwright. Too many young people are struggling with trauma and identity issues without proper support. Dr. Chun was quoted as saying, "We need to teach children that asking for help is a sign of strength, not weakness, and that they don't need to depend on their peers to manage their mental health. Professional support is available, and it works, but only if we make it accessible and remove the stigma around using it." I smiled as I read the quote, proud of how far Alex had come from the broken teenager who had tried to make me responsible for his emotional well-being. That evening, Daniel found me staring out our kitchen window while dinner cooked on the stove. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "Just thinking about the paths not taken," I said, leaning back against his chest. "Any regrets?" he asked. I thought about Alex, about the 10 years I'd given him in our previous life, about the child we'd lost when he decided I was responsible for his unhappiness. I thought about the version of myself who had believed that love meant sacrifice, that caring meant carrying someone else's pain. "None at all," I said, and meant it with every fiber of my being. Because this version of our story, where Alex learned to save himself and I learned to save myself, was so much better than the original ending where we both drowned. Sometimes the greatest love story isn't about two people finding each other. Sometimes it's about two people learning to be whole on their own, so they can love others from a place of strength rather than need. And sometimes the most beautiful ending is the one where everyone gets to live. As Daniel and I sat down to dinner that night, talking about our work and our plans for the weekend, I felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with romantic love, and everything to do with authentic self-love. I had learned to choose myself first, and in doing so, I had chosen a life worth living. That was the greatest victory of all.